In the beginning, Naruto was an orphan who did things for attention and wanted recognition. Sasuke had his family slaughtered by his brother and was thus obsessed with revenge. Then he had a character arc where Orochimaru tempted him with the power that he desired, which combined with his envy towards Naruto led him to falling into temptation. Sasuke was more developed and had an arc. Naruto was a thematically perfect character for most of his arc. His philosophy was almost always the right one, and he never really needed a change, until the final battle. I find this more boring than what Sasuke had going on. At the start of part 2, Sasuke is the same, but now that he has more power, he's more calm and focused on his goal. Naruto is mostly the same in part 2, but he starts a character arc. He keeps going berserk in every arc he stars in, except for the Akatsuki suppression. Take notice of how he never uses Talk no Jutsu during battle during this time. While this is good development, it doesn't compare to Sasuke actually getting so much done. He forms a team, is partially responsible for the deaths of 2 Akatsuki, and finally accomplishes his goal of ending Itachi's life. Furthermore, during the Pain arc, he gets the new goal of destroying Konoha. He makes so much progress, meanwhile Naruto is simply flipping out each arc, but the end of the Pain arc changed everything. When Naruto was able to calmly bring back his powers of empathy and persuasion, he became a very different character. The extent of how great he became was only truly exhibited when Team 7 reunited. During this scene, Sasuke is still being extremely effective, but he's losing his cool and becoming a little psychotic. This allows Naruto to surpass him as a character by miles. When the two meet, Naruto is so relaxed, the complete reverse of the end of part 1. Now that he's experienced loss in Jiraiya, he can finally understand Sasuke. He's so believably understanding and empathetic, saying that he could see himself in his shoes, and while we don't know it yet, he's even surpassing Hashirama. In his time, when Hashirama had to choose between the village and Madara, he chose the village, but here, Naruto is saying that he'll save Sasuke and the village. He plans to bring out the greatest solution without sacrifice. Naruto verbally slaps some sense into Sasuke. If you pay attention, Sasuke cuts out all the psycho crap after this talk. When Obito's trying to take Sasuke away, he stops Obito so that he can hear what Naruto has to say to him. He even says that they'll both die if they fight, but that he's willing to shoulder the hatred with him because they're friends. The Naruto on the rooftop would have taunted Sasuke again here. The Naruto in the Valley of the End would have gotten angry that he wasn't getting through to Sasuke. The Naruto in Orochimaru's hideout would have given up and been depressed. The Naruto who fought pain wouldn't have had effective replies. But this version of Naruto oozes with confidence and demands respect while giving out respect. His words are moving and they cut deeper than a knife. He comes off as wise. Sasuke would not reach Naruto's level again until they both returned to the final valley and he gave his grand speech. That's when they became even. One time for my manga readers, one time for my anime bros. Lame people can't tell the difference. One time for somebody who knows. King Yume on stage, peak reality on stage. Welcome back to the Anime Writing Academy. Remember to like, share, and sub. I'm supposed to be going in order, but between now and episode 1, I came up with 2 new additions to the story. The first is the title. I'm calling it To Pimp a Butterfly. At first, I was thinking water or H2O, but I decided to be random and I enjoy copying. After all, great artists steal. After choosing TPAB, I came up with a justification. The album is considered a classic, and so is the story I'm writing, so naming it To Pimp a Butterfly is only natural. The second thing I came up with was part of the external climax. In the finals, Joseph's team and his opponents are drinking some energy drink like Red Bull, and they're winning while the main team is tired. Joseph and his team are going to be tempted to go against their coach and drink Red Bull to gain energy, but Joseph sticks to water. After the timeout, Joseph starts bawling on his opponents, and the opponents are beginning to crash from the energy drinks. That's actually a combination of external and philosophical reversals, but I'll get into that later. My focus this episode is to develop the internal and external stakes, give them both angels and devils, and complete the introduction. The external stake is winning in basketball and being a good athlete. I made that clear in the previous paragraph, but what's the internal/emotional stake? According to Tyler Morey, Jangles revolves around the romantic relationship and Shawshank around the friendship between the two main characters. According to Michael Arndt, Luke's is about his call to greatness. This is a difficult decision, but I'll go with the inner stake. Joseph will wonder if he can become a star player and MVP. Now I have the stakes. Time for the Arias, or angels and devils. For the external stakes, the angel will be Coach Jermaine, and the devils will be any rival teams. For the internal, the angel will be Joseph's dad, and the devil will be one of Joseph's teammates. The external Arias are self-explanatory. I chose Mr. Inkerton as the internal angel because it makes sense for a family member to provide emotional support. I chose the teammate as the internal devil because it has to be someone who Joseph can interact with frequently and understand his internal struggle. Having this teammate simply be a pessimistic jerk is kinda weak for me, so I'll make it that this guy also wants to be the MVP, and since there's only room for one, he puts Joseph down. Alright, all 3 stakes and their arias have been completed. Before I go to the introduction, I want to develop the arias as characters. Joseph's father will be named Storm Ingerton. He's going to be a supportive and relaxed character who had ambitious dreams as a kid but never got to pursue them. That's personality and backstory. He won't have a character arc. His purpose is to provide for his family. Joseph's rival teammate will be named Maximus Bleak Burrow. He's a cocky and skilled baller whose goal is to become the best player on his team. No background, but he might have an arc when he accepts Joe as the MVP and takes the number 2 role. I know I said I'd do the intro, but I can already see how the climax will play out. In both Tyler and Michael's videos, they said that in the climax, all stakes should look like they're about to fail, but then in quick succession, they turn around into passes one by one. So here's my climax. Joseph is losing externally because his team is losing. He's losing internally or emotionally because he's playing poorly and Maximus is currently performing the best. He's losing philosophically because he's drinking water and is mediocre while the other team is drinking Red Bull and full of energy. After a timeout, Maximus and the team are considering getting Red Bull against the coach's wishes because the tournament is being sponsored by them. Why can't Jermaine stop them is a question that occurred to me, so I'll have him be sick and have an assistant coach with no backbone subbing in for him. As Joseph is about to drink some, George Sugarson, the philosophical devil, has a kamikaze moment where he yells at Joseph from the stands and tells him not to. This means that I decided to give George an arc. Michael Arndt says that a kamikaze moment is when a character does something risky which reverses all of the stakes that were headed downwards. In Star Wars, it was Han Solo coming back. So after George tells him not to drink the Red Bull, Joseph snaps himself out of the pressure and drinks good old water and makes sure his team does too. Philosophical stake passes. When the match resumes, Joseph starts balling on his foes. A montage of him performing ankle breakers, dunks, layups, field goals, and assists is shown while epic music plays in the background and characters narrate over the spectacle they're witnessing. That's from my hype scene video. Watch that. So the external stake passes as his team starts winning. Finally, the game ends with Joseph being the MVP and bringing his team to victory. Internal stake passes. So that's the climax of To Pimp a Butterfly. Now I need to go back and write the rest of the plot. Our important characters are Joseph Ingerton, George Sugarson, Jermaine Lightford, Storm Ingerton, and Maximus Bleakborough. I'm going to introduce all of them in the introduction of the plot, but I might actually create a midpoint first. You'll find out in the next episode, because I think I got a lot of good work done here. What's up guys, Super Zippermouth Yume is back with another video, but this time I have bad news. One Piece has been getting bad and is going to get cancelled by next year, but let's start with the declining quality. I've always believed that One Piece has been getting bad since the time skip, and now I have the manga sales to prove my point. The Oricon sales were provided by the Twitter user Josuke. The sales go from volume 80 to volume 100. Let's go from the greatest sales to the worst sales. This graph thankfully shows which volumes are in which arc, which makes my arguments easier. As you can see, volume 65 was the peak, and this is during the Fishman Island arc. I've always said that this was One Piece's best arc, and now the sales literally prove that. This shows that viewers really resonated with Hody Jones as an antagonist. He's objectively the best. It also shows that Shirahoshi was a fan favorite character, along with the fact that it had the best fights in any existing manga. Next is Dressrosa. The sales average out to being pretty consistent, but overall, it's a drop from Fishman's greatness. This shows that Doflamingo was a good villain, but not as good as Hody Jones. It also shows that viewers were beginning to pick up on the dragged out arcs with an overinflated cast of characters and weren't having it. They were also noticing the flaws with the hockey power system, but this was only the beginning. The sales start to really drop off in the Whole Cake Island arc. All throughout the arc, the sales are free falling. This shows that Big Mom and Katakuri were mediocre villains that don't hold a candle to Hody Jones or Doflamingo. The length, cast, and power system were also beginning to annoy viewers. Katakuri's battle showed the audience how reliant One Piece had become on the garbage power system known as hockey. Volume 89 had a steep drop compared to the rest, and what do you know, this volume includes the introduction of Snake Man and ends the Katakuri fight. Fans just weren't feeling the alternate gear 4th forms or future vision. The Wano Country arc faces another drop once again. It initially is recovering from the disaster that was Whole Cake Island, but it falls in 92, recovers in 93, and then continues falling from 94 and on. 92 dropped because Luffy had lost to Kaido and got put in jail. Fans were catching on to how poorly constructed hockey is thanks to this battle. They also felt angry that Luffy had lost and was wasting time in jail. 93 has a recovery because the greatest character in One Piece, Zoro, is on the cover. 94 and on fall off because fans are broken from Zoro's charisma and they become even more aware of the length, cast, and hockey problems. This causes them to really lose interest. This also shows that Kaido and Big Mom are not good villains. They aren't well developed, resulting in boring characters. There's a spike at volume 100, but this is because it's the 100th volume, and this is seen as an accomplishment. Finally, I want to go back to Impel Down and Marineford. Impel Down has the worst sales in comparison to the rest of the arcs, proving that this arc was pure mid. Marineford had higher sales and slightly increased over its run, but the low views in comparison to Wano shows that this was a mid-war arc that just wasn't hitting. Akainu wasn't a strong enough villain to carry the arc. Marineford had pitiful numbers in the grand scheme, not even touching 2.5 million, meaning that it was a mid-arc. The sales spiked in volume 59, where Whitebeard and Ace died, showing that viewers were actually invested in these characters. In conclusion, One Piece's sales have been falling off because of the length problem, cast problem, and hockey problem. The villains and plot just haven't been as good since Fishman Island. Bleach got cancelled when its views were falling, despite being one of the big three, so we can expect the same will happen to One Piece. I predict that One Piece will end by the end of 2023. I say this because the magazine probably wants to give their biggest manga ample time to wrap up the story. The Story Surgeon is back. I recently created a visual for the plot cycle I created in one of my videos. I thought it would be helpful to implement it into older videos where it would be useful. First is my video on Naruto arc's plot structure. Each arc had several cycles. For the Land of Waves, the opening was a cat mission, which was a short cycle. The inciting incident is phase 1 of the overarching cycle for the arc. In the first act break, there is a Demon Brothers cycle and a Zabuza cycle, both of which are finished here. The midpoint is Kakashi realizing that Zabuza is still alive and that his students are too weak. The second act break has the tree climbing exercise, which is another cycle. And then there's the final battle, a cycle against Zabuza and Haku. When Gato is defeated, the cycle ends. The mission is completed soon after, ending the overarching cycle. This is from chapter 9 to 33, which is 25 chapters. Great pacing. How the 6 moments of a 3-act structure play into the plot cycle is interesting. What I noticed is that the opening can be its own small complete cycle, which I've seen in other movies before. The inciting incident is usually phase 1 of a new cycle, establishing the problem. The problem is usually an overarching one, with multiple mini-cycles within it to come. The first act break usually has multiple complete mini-cycles back to back. The midpoint is usually the third phase or aftermath of a cycle. The second act break has more back-to-back cycles, and the climax is the third phase of a cycle, like the midpoint. The same pattern can be seen in the following arcs or mini-movies. Next is my analysis on the York New City arc. At one point, I'm talking about how complex the plot is and how it doesn't have a formula. I can reinforce that by implementing the plot cycle. In a lot of battle manga, the main events that happen are usually fighting or training. In York New, there were various types of events, but they weren't just for show. They had cycles, giving them a solid impact on the plot. Gon appraising was a cycle. Kurapika becoming a bodyguard was a cycle. The same goes for Chrollo getting the fortune-telling power, Gon and Killua being captured, and more. They were all problems that needed to be solved, and in some cases, their results had an impact later in the plot. Last is my vagabond critique. In chapter 1, a cycle starts in the first fight and ends when Takezo beats everyone. One chapter, one cycle, not bad. In chapter 2, there is no cycle. The cycle starts with phase 1, which is a character is faced with a problem. The murder of Akemi's father appears at the end, but there is still no problem yet. Chapter 3 has the same issue. There is no problem until the very end, where the gang shows up at the house. Chapter 4 is where the boss starts causing problems, and the cycle begins, which is why I said it was okay. Chapter 5 finished the cycle. Chapter 6 is the sex chapter, and once again, there is no cycle until the end. I don't count Matsuhashi smashing Oko as a problem or conflict. Bandits show up at the end, starting phase 1 of a cycle. Chapter 7 continues the cycle with Takezo fighting. Chapter 8 starts the cycle of Granny being a villain. Only phase 1 is started in this chapter, which is why I called it weak. Chapter 9, Takezo takes on his problem by hiding in the mountains and then trying to explain to Granny. Meanwhile, Otsu has her own mini-cycle of trying to reject Aoki. In chapter 10, Takezo has to deal with Granny's trap. As you can see, these chapters actually have cycles going on, albeit very slowly. Chapter 11 has fighting, continuing phase 2. In chapter 12, he's still dealing with the Granny problem, which I now notice is another issue. If you look at many other great manga, they can juggle multiple plot cycles and move through them quickly. Meanwhile, Vagabond has chapters that are mostly free of a cycle, and chapters that drag on the second phase of one cycle for a long time. Otsu's cycle with Aoki continues in 12. In chapter 13, Takezo fights Kohei. Chapter 14 has Takuan dealing with Aoki. Chapter 15 has no progression on either of the cycles until the very end. Chapter 15 ends with Otsu finding Takezo, but chapter 16 barely adds anything to the plot. He passes out and there's some dialogue. The cycle only continues in 17, where Takezo is hanging from a tree, having failed his cycle. but then he just monologues. At the start of the chapter, the cycle finishes, but for the rest of the chapter, no cycle is started. This would be fine if this were the resolution or falling action of the arc, but it's not. In 18, Otsu vs Granny cycle starts, but doesn't enter phase 2 yet. In 19, Kohei comes at the end, which leads into him freeing Takezo in 20. Finally, there is a new cycle. Takuan takes Takezo into the forest to kill him, making another new cycle. 21 has Takezo choosing his place of death. The cycle ends in chapter 22 when Miyamoto is born. That Takuan cycle was good for Vagabond standards, but it took 3 chapters to do something that could have been done in 1. The Takezo vs Granny cycle went from 8 to 17, which is 10 chapters. As I said before, too many of these chapters didn't progress the cycle in meaningful ways. Chapters 1 to 21 make up the first 2 volumes, yet they're riddled with plot issues. Volume 3 is much better because the cycle versus the Yoshioka school is started early on, and almost every chapter is dedicated to progressing the cycle in a meaningful way, primarily through fighting. Musashi takes down enemies one by one, which keeps phase 2 of the cycle interesting. In conclusion, Yumesuke's plot cycle is spectacular. I saw people being happy about KNY's recent animation, but I wasn't happy about it, so I decided to spread my unhappiness. But in all honesty, the lack of understanding between art and animation from anime fans is disappointing, so I'm going to try and clear that up. The misinformation about art versus animation is very similar to the misinterpretation of budget versus talent. People have made videos clearing things up, especially after One Punch Man, but back in the day, when people would see beautiful Sakuga, they'd immediately attribute it to budget, which is not always the case. Some people still do that today. One Punch Man revealed that its animation was a result of a network of talented animators putting in a high amount of effort. Using common sense, simply having a ton of money to pay animators won't result in amazing animation unless the animators are talented. You can't pay someone to make Sakuga, they have to already be capable of making it, then you hire them. Now, art versus animation. I'm amazed at how many people still get this wrong, especially since the Naruto vs Pain fight has existed for years. In that fight, something looked off. Initially people said it was just bad animation, but fans eventually began to wisen up and realize that the animation was actually good. In fact, it's Sakuga. The issue was the art. The characters were very off-modeled and squashed and stretched like cartoon characters, which was inappropriate for the tone of the fight. Even when I first started using Twitter, I saw a post clarifying the distinction between art and animation for this fight, yet the same mistake is being made once again with the latest Kimetsu's fight. I like the fight, which is why I have an analysis on it, but the animation is not amazing, which is the opposite of what I keep hearing. I'm not gonna bash it too much, but a lot of the time, it was hard to tell what was going on and see the individual attacks. What I believe most people are impressed with is not the animation, but the art, the line work, the colors, the compositing, the flashy colors. That's what looks amazing, and I'd agree, but the animation is nothing special. If you still struggle to tell the difference, there are 2 methods I know for distinguishing which is actually impressive. The first method is to pause the scene and look at individual frames. If you are looking at a single frame and saying this is great animation, you're impressed by the art, not the animation. Believe it or not, but animation requires multiple frames. The second method is to take away the colors and focus on just the line work and how the frames create motion. An easy way to do this is to look at key animation. There are animated scenes of just the key frames before any color is added. If it looks impressive, the scene is impressing you with its animation. The best example of key animation is Levi vs Kenny's squad. That scene looks breathtaking even without the colors. You can clearly tell what's going on. The animation is smooth and there are stylistic flourishes like smears included. There are more AOT, Naruto, and One Piece key animation videos available online. For examples of anime with colored Sakuga, the 2nd and 3rd seasons of World Trigger and the 1st season of Jujutsu Kaisen have amazing work. I'd recommend a site named Sakuga Buru for seeing Sakuga. In conclusion, art and animation are 2 different things. Just because the art looks good doesn't mean the animation is also good. The story surgeon is back. Don't play with me. Hardest joint out the South since slavery. Fairy Tail's manga fell off in sales, and I can attribute that decline to the dip in quality of the story. Since this video is about the fall off, I'll start with where the manga was around its peak. This was volume 37. Volume 37 was during the Grand Magic Games. This shows that this is the greatest arc in the manga, and that the fans really loved this arc. It was a tournament packed with back-to-back amazing fights. Erza vs Kagura vs Minerva is one of the iconic fights in this volume. This proves that the 3-way battle was the best one that Fairy Tail ever had to offer. Volume 50 is a steep drop-off. This shows that fans weren't messing with the time skip. This volume was in the early stages of the new arc when Natsu and Lucy see that Wendy was in a new guild. The arc had a very boring and slow start, and this wasn't engaging enough. The manga was rising in sales up until volume 54. This volume had Erza defeating Agil. This is the second time a peak has had Erza fighting, which shows that Erza in combat is when Fairy Tail is at its best. This volume ends with Natsu and Zera's first fight. Zeref has been one of the longest hyped up villains in the story, so having the protagonist finally exchange blows with him is extremely cathartic. Natsu even ends the volume with a new power-up named Fire Dragon King mode. Starting with volume 55, the sales start falling down again. Volume 55 is where Natsu was revealed to be Zeref's brother. The controversial plot twist clearly did not resonate with fans and was objectively a bad decision. Volume 61 provides a brief recovery, but then it falls down again. Volume 61 had Natsu and Zeref fighting again in a rematch. The two exchanged several blows and even engaged in a philosophical battle at the very end. Like I said before, capitalizing on a fight that had been built up and expected is a powerful move. This also shows that a philosophical battle is an elite writing technique. In conclusion, Erza fighting is when Fairy Tail is at its best, and executing on built-up fights along with philosophical battles are objectively good decisions. The Grand Magic Games was the best arc, and the Alvarez Empire was one of the worst arcs in the manga. Shout out to the haters that promote a hustler. Art hot, writing cold, I'm bipolar sucker. King Yume on stage. Peak reality on stage. Story surgeon about to enter the narrative hospital. Peep the wisdom. Remember to like, share, and sub. Okay, so since the last episode, I ran into a little problem. This is turning out to be a sports movie, and I kinda don't want it to be. I want it to be a movie that's just a drama. I'll probably talk about it another time, but I believe that all stories fall under the drama genre. So basically, I'm saying I want this story to be really plain. Why? Because it's easy to just throw action, romance, or mystery in your face and keep your attention. But if my story is bland in the genre department, then the writing has to be really good. I chose the sport because I was thinking of Whiplash, but drumming is less of a spectacle than bowling. I'll try to lay low on the bowling, but I might fail, and this will be a sports anime movie. Also, since the last video, I decided that Coach Jermaine will be the inciting incident and that the midpoint will be Joseph losing a match in the group stage due to having a bad diet. Now, they have to play against a hard next team, so I have to build up to these with the other sections of the plot. Introduction. I want to establish the characters, the three stakes, and the angel/devil pairs. Joseph and George will be playing 2K at George's house and drinking a lot of soda. Joseph makes a lot of jokes and has George constantly laughing. Then they'll watch a basketball match. When Joseph leaves to go home, George gives him a 12-pack of soda. The next day, Storm is taking his son to practice. They are both talking about how well he's playing. As Storm talks about the only teammate that could rival him, the scene cuts to Maximus bawling out on the rest of the team. Storm says that Joseph can become the best as they arrive. Joseph meets his teammates and makes all of them laugh except for Maximus. He makes a joke about him being the MVP. The team splits into two and has a scrimmage. Joseph and Maximus are on separate teams. Joseph plays really well, but Maximus's team wins. Maximus tells the MC that there isn't enough room for two MVPs. After practice, the team is told about the tournament they'll be entering and the new coach they'll be having. I'm calling the main team the Bulls. The next day, Joseph is practicing after school while drinking soda and Red Bull. An adult comes up to him and tells him that he's dumb for drinking that stuff and that he should stick with water. Joseph tells him that he's still great without water, so the man challenges him to a 1v1. At the start, Joseph is dominating easily, but in the final third, he starts to get tired and his opponent makes a comeback. Joseph still manages to pull out a win, so he doesn't take the man's advice, despite running out of breath and allowing a man past his prime to come back. On Joseph's walk home, George calls him about a new flavor of soda coming out tomorrow. George states that soda is the best drink in the world. Later that day, the Bulls have practice and are introduced to their new coach, Jermaine Lightford. Joseph recognizes him as the adult he had a 1v1 with. Jermaine says that the Bulls are going to win this tournament and gives them stamina training, which the players hate. That's the inciting incident. As you can see, I introduced all of the stakes and most of the arias. I didn't have the external devil because several teams will be that depending on where they are in the tournament. I also introduced all of the important characters and showed off their personalities. Now I need to write the first act break and have it lead into the midpoint. I'm probably going to be more vague here. So the characters are training, but Joseph is still sipping on soda and energy drinks, and George is encouraging him. Joseph and Jermaine have a fight over this, which only pushes Joseph away. all of his other teammates are drinking water, so he's the only one who lacks stamina. We also learn about George and Storm's backstories. The Bulls are in the group phase of the tournament and beat their first 2 opponents. The midpoint is their 3rd opponent. The 2nd and 3rd match were on the same day, and Joseph drinks energy drinks between matches. Maximus also gets injured in match 2 and is unable to play. In the 3rd match, the MC is exhausted much faster, and without him or Maximus to carry the team, they lose. They still made it out of the group, but now they are placed against one of the best teams in the bracket. Had they won, they would have faced an easier opponent. Joseph realizes that he wasn't there when his team needed him, which Maximus points out. Joseph realizes this is an MVP behavior. Soon after, we get a cut to Joseph and Storm at the doctor's. Joseph is told that his blood sugar is high and he's getting close to having diabetes. I just realized how good of a midpoint this is. I forgot to say this earlier, but if you see my act structure video, you know that a midpoint should be where the worst things happen. Here, the plot takes an external blow in the form of the Bulls losing. It takes an internal blow in the form of Joseph not being an MVP. And finally, Joseph's philosophy is challenged. Because of this, he decides to go cold turkey and cuts out energy drinks and soda from his life. When hanging out with his best friend, he's told that you can still live with diabetes, but Joseph doesn't think this is MVP-like, asking how many top-tier athletes played with diabetes. The two get into a fight and Joseph leaves to go running. We're in the 2nd act break. Joseph continues to drink water and build up his stamina. As the Bulls move up the bracket, the MC starts putting in more work, which Jermaine notices. Joseph and Maximus both work hard to beat the good team at the start of the bracket and hoop on their next foes. Meanwhile, Joseph tries to make up with George, but the latter isn't having that. Joseph tells him where the finals will be, if they make it. After more matches, the Bulls reach the finals, but Jermaine gets sick, so he won't be able to make it. This match is being sponsored by Red Bull, and the enemy team, which I'll call the Lakers, is chugging that stuff. It's clearly giving them a lot of energy, and has them dominating the first half. George is shown to be in the crowd, but Joseph doesn't know this yet. Then the climax happens. The team is about to drink Red Bull, but George tells Joseph not to, which leads him to drink water, and he convinces his team to do the same. A montage of Joseph wiping the floor happens, and the Lakers begin to crash. After witnessing this spectacle, Maximus decides to stop competing with Joseph, and decides to let him control the game while he works as his number 2. The Bulls win. Joseph and George squash their beef, and Joseph is clearly the MVP. That's the end of To Pimp a Butterfly. I was unable to decrease the sports presence, but that's fine. This story was created in 14 hours of real time, but even less was actually spent writing or thinking about it. The first episode took 1 hour, so did the 2nd, so did the 3rd. That's 3 hours of actual work. You're probably wondering how I created such a classic from such a ridiculous theme in such a short amount of time. Is it because I'm a genius? Yes, but no. Writing is easy when you know what you're doing. If you tell a history major to debug a program, they'll be lost. But if you tell a CS major to debug it, they'll probably do it quickly. It's cause the latter knows what they're doing. In this case, I have a PhD in story writing from Genius University. Call me Dr. Yume. I need an Oscar for this legendary movie. Let's start a petition for giving King Yumesuke an Oscar. No Bill Cosby shit, but if viewers is sleeping, then fuck him. I was watching a music related video and I heard the person mention music theory. This happens almost every time a music expert speaks about music. The same day, I decided to act on a thought that had been brewing in the background for some time. Why isn't there a story writing equivalent of music theory? I looked up writing theory and story theory. I'd never heard anyone mention it, but I wondered what I would find. The results were unhelpful or unrelated. The same day, I then remembered something. In the same way that music experts plug music theory, writing experts tend to plug one of 3 books. Story by Robert McKee, Anatomy of a Story by John Truby, and Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. That's bizarre to me. Music fans that want to learn music don't have to read multiple books by different musicians to learn. They have a singular field of study with a vast amount of details to go to. It's even a major in college. Meanwhile, writers have 3 main books that are recommended to read. So using my storytelling PhD, I decided to create the concept of story theory by combining common knowledge, the knowledge within these 3 books, and my own knowledge. Basic things that would go into there are the 4 pillars of story, 3-act structure, stakes, and show don't tell. More complex ideas that I could tackle are story beats, Chekhov's gun, 4-corner opposition, and wants and needs. To make story theory as effective as possible, I'll read through these 3 books and add everything that I feel is important or helpful to my videos. But it's a tragedy that writers can't go to one place to find all this information. I actually already have videos that I consider part of story theory, where I create formulas for success in my view of writing. Although they mostly apply to battle manga, I'll make a playlist for these videos. Let's begin. The first thing I want to point out is the types of intelligence required of writing a good story. The triarchic theory of intelligence says that the three types are creative, analytical, and practical. Writing a good story takes mastery of the first two. I can teach analysis, but I can't teach creativity. Just because a person can analyze art doesn't mean that they have the creativity to make art. Creativity allows the story to be unique and interesting, while analysis allows the story to follow the underlying guidelines of writing and be satisfying. Creativity is the idea, analysis is the execution. A great idea with a bad execution is as bad as a bad idea with a great execution. Music theory starts with the fundamentals and teaches the building blocks of music, so that's what I'll do here. What is a story? In the book Story by Robert McKee, the author says that a story is a series of acts that build to a last climax, which brings about absolute and irreversible change. I agree with most of this, but my definition is simpler. I believe that a good story is a chain of build-ups that lead to payoffs. The build-ups are part of the 4 pillars of story and are given a satisfactory conclusion by the time the story is finished. I came to this definition by separating what I'd consider a good story from a bad one. Let me tell you 3 short stories to show you my thought process. Story 1. I woke up today, I brushed my teeth, I ate food, I went to sleep. Story 2. My band teacher gave me a music sheet to practice. I practiced when I got home, but I wasn't very good. I went to sleep. Story 3. I was given a sheet of music to play in a week. I practiced the first day, but I was bad. I kept practicing throughout the week. On the day of the playing test, I played the best in my class. It's pretty clear that story 3 was the good one. Story 1 had no build-up or payoff, and story 2 had build-up that didn't pay off. This thought pattern is what led me to defining a good story as a chain of build-ups ending with payoffs. That brings me to the 4 pillars of story. These are theme, character, plot, and setting. As I said before, there are 4 categories that all build-ups and payoffs will fall under. I'll give examples of each pillar having payoff. Theme. A story establishes the hero's view and the enemy's view on a specific topic. In the final battle, the hero prevails, proving that their side of the theme was right. Character. A character having a flaw and changing, or a character having a goal and accomplishing it. Plot. A story having an event that creates a problem and the multiple events that lead into solving that problem. Setting. A MacGuffin or power system being established and eventually being a solution to a problem. As you can see, everything in the story, including the threads of build-up and payoff, falls into one of the pillars. Now I'll go over the importance of each pillar. The first and most important is theme. This is the message of the story and is a sentence. Look back at my 3 short story examples. Robert McKee calls them story values and defines values as the universal qualities of human experience that may shift from positive to negative or vice versa from one moment to the next. He also says that a writer must believe in what he writes, which I mostly agree with. A theme is essentially a storyteller telling their audience, I believe in this message and you should too. A paraphrased version of another one of his quotes is, storytelling is the creative demonstration of truth/theme. It is setting up a theme and then proving it. End quote. In his book, McKee says quotes like, "Story isn't about rules, there is no way it must be done, and there is no foolproof model." I agree with most of this. It's not about rules, but there are guidelines and conventions. Those conventions still exist today because they were collectively effective tools in writing. There is absolutely no way it must be done. Story is subjective, and you'll see later that there are things I disagree with in the books I'm referencing. That's just how art is. Like with music theory, the guidelines can be broken, but when pros break them, it's often on purpose, not by accident. Like following the guidelines of music theory leads to good music, I am creating a story theory that will lead to good results in story by following the guidelines. But as I said before, simply understanding it doesn't ensure that you have the creativity to create good art. In future videos, I'll continue with the fundamentals and eventually get to analysis. Investment is a powerful writing technique that can increase the satisfaction in the payoff of a specific story thread. I'll use Piccolo's journey in combat up until his battle against Android 17 as my example. Battle manga are kinda like sports seasons, especially when they follow the popular conventions. Each arc is like a new season, and I want to see my favorite character perform well. I want to see them have epic battles and take home wins. So imagine the team I support is Team Piccolo. At the start of DBZ, he and Goku defeat Raditz, but it's not completely satisfying. Even though Piccolo is the only survivor, they were completely outmatched and only won because of the Saiyan tail weakness. It's still a win nonetheless. Then Vegeta and Nappa arrive with Cybermen. Piccolo kills one, but they were also taken out by Krillin and Tien, so this doesn't feel like much of an accomplishment. However, the fight against Nappa was important. He tanked Chaozu's and Tien's strongest attacks, so seeing Piccolo and Krillin handle him was definitely a highlight. But this is cut short by Piccolo sacrificing his life in order to save Gohan. So far, Piccolo hasn't had a solo victory. In the Frieza arc, Piccolo is revived and fuses with Nail, getting a power-up. By the time he shows up, Krillin, Gohan, and Vegeta were being mopped by Frieza. All three of them combined were no match, but when Piccolo shows up, he solos Frieza and they're on even footing. This means that Piccolo has currently surpassed Vegeta, who was even stronger than Goku in the past arc. This level up in power is short-lived, because once Frieza transforms again, Piccolo starts losing. He doesn't do anything more impressive after this. The Android arc is where things start to get good. His first fight is against Dr. Gero, who is currently one of the primary antagonists. Piccolo fights this fight alone and wipes the floor with him. His next fight is with the other Z fighters against 17 and 18, in which they get swept. Vegeta and 18 had an extended fight, but at the end, Piccolo gets taken down by 17 in 2 hits and is unable to land a blow. The other fighters are down pretty quickly as well. This is easily the worst loss of Piccolo's career so far. The androids were strong enough to defeat 2 Super Saiyans, but losing in 2 hits is pretty shameful. He's able to recover in his next fight, which is against Cell, the actual primary antagonist of the arc. He is winning the battle until the android absorbs Piccolo's energy, which is the only hit Piccolo takes. Soon after, the Namekian regenerates his arm, and then Cell runs away. Piccolo has had a victory, a loss, and then a victory. So far, both of the wins are arguably big moments for him. Twice, he's fought the primary antagonist of the arc and was winning until they ran away. He's consistently showing his power and getting great highlights, but none of these battles have been as impressive because neither Gero nor Cell have done anything particularly impressive or threatening before or during their fights. Gero beat Yamcha, who was beaten by Cybermen 2 arcs ago. Meanwhile, this was Cell's first fight, and he didn't seem to be as strong as the androids Piccolo had just lost to. Now, we get to Piccolo vs Android 17. Up until now, Piccolo's solo wins have been against people who have no or low achievements, and the battles where he fights someone with credentials, he may perform well at the start, but he eventually loses. His only team win was against Raditz with Goku. Before his fight against 17, he fuses with Kami for another power-up. When the two decided to battle, this fight was ensured to be a legendary moment. Not only was this a rematch, giving Piccolo a chance to get revenge, but he was confident that he could beat 17, a character who easily beat a Super Saiyan. In this battle, the Namekian and Android fight on even footing until Cell interrupts the fight. This fight was short, and if I were to analyze it with my grading system, it would be pretty average, but this is one of the best fights in DBZ because of investment. I was invested in Piccolo's journey as a fighter, and I've been waiting to see him get a big win. As I said before, until this fight, Piccolo had beaten scrubs and lost to powerful foes. But this is the first fight where Piccolo fights solo against a powerful opponent, puts on a great show, and doesn't lose. 17 has had the most credit under his belt out of all of the opponents Piccolo's fought. Nappa beat Tien and Chaozu. Frieza was beating Krillin, Gohan, and Vegeta. Gero and Cell were covered before, but 17 had easily taken down a Super Saiyan. Frieza was Piccolo's best performance before, but he didn't even fight him in his final form. Then Super Saiyan Trunks easily defeated Mecha Frieza, who was in final form, and 17 easily defeated Super Saiyan Trunks. Those are huge leaps in power, yet here Piccolo is throwing hands with 17. On top of that, it's a revenge fight, and I don't think I need to explain why this is a plus, because revenge is universally cathartic. The fight may have ended in a draw, but no matter how you look at it, it's Piccolo's highest high and potentially the most satisfying fight in DBZ. The narrative build-up behind this confrontation completely carries the fight to the top. That is the power of investment. In conclusion, investment is a powerful writing tool. Like I said in my story theory videos, the core of a story is setup and payoff. The more a story can get its viewers invested in the setup, the more powerful a punch the payoff will have. In other words, if hentai's really built up the relationship and chemistry between two characters, then I'd actively want to see them smash. Thank you for watching. The Story Surgeon is back, with penmanship like a scalpel. I checked out the sales of Boruto's manga and I was surprised. I've been bringing up first week sales in a few of my videos recently, and one of the trends I noticed is that all manga sales rise and fall. However, Boruto sales are different. They immediately started falling off and only had a brief recovery in volume 13 before falling off again. Even the anime airing had no observable effect on the sales. This can only mean one thing: I was right. In my video titled "What Went Wrong," I listed all of the issues I had with Boruto, and these declining sales proved that I was right. Continuing a story that had ended was a bad idea. Being a sequel would mean creating new conflicts for a story that had already resolved the biggest conflicts. The power balancing would also be terrible since the characters from Naruto had escalated so much. The sequel also allowed for negative changes and retcons to the story. Boruto would also struggle living up to Naruto's quality. It'll always be compared to its predecessor. Boruto deciding to focus on the new generation was also a terrible idea, especially since the new cast was weaker. The plot also sadly bends over backwards to let the new cast solve major conflicts when the adults could logically handle it without their help. This leads to the old gen getting nerfed, which is disrespectful to the characters and the audience. Then Boruto tries to rehash Naruto's ideas and does it worse. The main characters are either carbon copies or bizarro versions of their parents. Finally, Boruto is written worse than Naruto in total. You should watch my video on how I do a Naruto sequel instead. It's titled Naruto Sequel Ideas. But why was there a slight rise for volume 13? This volume is when Naruto and Sasuke are fighting Ishiki, and in the final chapter, 51, Naruto uses Baryon mode, while saying that he'll die if he uses the form. Such a large event as the protagonist of the prequel dying probably drew viewers back, but of course, the manga backtracks on this and just kills Kurama instead. In conclusion, Boruto's sales have been on a constant decline because the story is bad for all of the reasons I listed out. But Fairy Tail 100 Year Quest follows the same trend, a constant decline. Fairy Tail ended in July 2017 and 100 Year started in July 2018, a year later. Naruto ended in November 2014 and Boruto started in May 2016, which is between 1 and 2 years later. Maybe starting a direct sequel to a story that ended less than 2 years ago is why the sales have been falling from the start. Maybe fans haven't been given enough time to want more content. Maybe because they are extensions of the original rather than an entirely new story, they carry on the fall that all manga experience. Nah, that can't be it. It's just cause the stories suck for all of the reasons I listed, and my opinion is objectively correct. Megalo Season 1 was a fun and epic boxing anime, but Season 2 not only surpasses Season 1, but also transcends the sports genre. In the first season, the themes mostly revolve around self-improvement and an underdog rising to the top. Sadly, the 13 episode count restrained the impact of that rise. The second season doesn't have this problem, because it uses boxing as a medium to tell a story with more universal and deeper themes. In the first half, the themes of the story are about overcoming trauma and discrimination. Joe is dealing with the trauma of Nambu dying and blaming himself for it, while Chief is dealing with the discrimination of being a Hispanophone immigrant in Japan. Joe keeps seeing a ghost of Nambu who says cruel things to him, like how he should have died instead. This Nambu doesn't have the personality of the real one. The ghost's personality is distorted and purely negative. To combat this, he takes painkillers which negatively affect his body and give him panic attacks. After orders from Chief, Joe throws the drugs away, but Nambu still haunts him and even offers him the drugs again. It is only after hearing Chief's past about losing his son and confronting his pain is he able to do the same. Just like in the flashback with the real Nambu, Joe asks his coach to fight with him again. The real Nambu took his hand, but this fake Nambu doesn't. Now Joe has moved past his trauma and he cuts his hair to symbolize this. Chief and his family of immigrants are dealing with discrimination primarily in the form of their land being sold. The amusement park they built their community on was never paid for, so it's technically not theirs. but the person selling the land intentionally did it out of ill will. Additionally, Chief says that the locals believe that the immigrants stole their jobs when they worked hard for next to nothing. Chief decides to confront the land issues by signing up for a Megalo box tournament and buying the land when he wins. In the finals, his opponent, Mamiya, taunts him with foul words towards his people, which effectively angers Chief, making him slip up. With advice from Joe, he's able to calm down and eventually achieve victory. Both of these characters are dealing with real problems that are outside the sport itself and thus have more weight. Additionally, when the two come together, they both level up. Joe goes from a boxer in the ring to a boxing coach, becoming the Nanbu for Chief. Chief goes from a boxer who fights in fixed matches to a real boxer who takes his wins by force. But this victory comes with a price. Chief dies in his sleep due to the injuries. This outcome was foreshadowed when he was losing consciousness before the final round. This death is amazing in multiple ways. The first is that it, once again, transcends the sports genre. Death is not something you see a lot in sports stories because it is usually unrelated. But boxing is a dangerous sport that can result in critical damage, and the story takes advantage of that. This consequence brings us into the real world, like the themes. The second reason it is great is because it is a reference to the ending of Ashita no Joe, which the whole anime is heavily inspired by, where Joe dies sitting down after his final match. The third reason is because there is a price paid for victory. This shows that Chief was willing to sacrifice his life in the ring for his family and their land, which is powerful. This is all just the first half. In the second half, the story has three narrative focuses. There's Joe, Edison Liu, and Mac Rosario. Joe's story is about him rebuilding his family. The kids from season 1 have beef with Joe because they feel like he betrayed them and Nanbu. Whether what he did is deserving of the treatment he receives is debatable, but Joe feels like he's betrayed them and he does what he can to make up for his actions. Boxing is mostly a medium to express the human condition in a dramatic way. When the kids lose the deed in their shop because of their antics, Joe steps into the ring in place of Sachio and wins it back for them. He rebuilds the Team Nowhere gym, mostly on his own, and even has a boxing match with Sachio to stop him from doing fixed fights in the underground ring, which is a reflection of where Joe started in season 1. He makes this bet because he wants Sachio to be his partner when he fights with Mac, like in the old days. After he wins, Team Nowhere is fully rebuilt. Joe has been accepted back into the family, and Sachio agrees to be Joe's second. Liu is Yuri's student who beat Joe in the past, but he wants a rematch against Joe because although he defeated him in the past, Joe was in terrible condition, and Liu believes that Joe underestimated the match because it was an exhibition match. In the present, he was putting more focus on Joe rather than his upcoming opponent, Mac. When Mac enters his signature mindset, Liu is completely defeated. He suffers terrible injuries from his loss against Mac and might never recover from his paralysis, but he still aspires to fight Joe and carry on Yuri's dream of defeating Joe. Mac's story is about him and the antagonist, Ryugo Sakuma. Mac was a megalo boxer turned policeman. As a boxer, he was a mediocre and forgettable hothead. As an officer, he saved many people from a dangerous fire and took a shot to the back that would paralyze them. This made him a local hero. Then Sakuma, the CEO of a tech company named Roscoe, came in to offer Mac Bess, a piece of technology that would allow Mac to not only walk again, but also box. Because of this, Mac became a top-tier boxer who could now control his emotions. He can also use Mac Time, which is a mode that he enters when he's under pressure, and it makes him perform better. Now he feels indebted to Sakuma. Sakuma wants to use Bess on injured veterans so that they can fight again, and uses Mac as a mascot for advertisement. It is later revealed that Bess has negative side effects on Mac, especially when he uses Mac Time, which Sakuma has intentionally been hiding. It makes him go out of control, which can be seen when he gravely injured Liu and when he lost control with his family outside of the ring. Mac decides to carry on his fight against Joe, but he won't use Mac Time and ensures that his second will forfeit the match if he enters the mode. In the second half, Joe's story is about rebuilding a family, Liu's is about carrying on a dream and taking on problems one at a time, and Mac's story is about what someone is willing to sacrifice. In conclusion, all of these themes tackle topics that are more universal and impactful compared to the themes like becoming the best athlete in your sport. The way this season is able to weave these stories into a boxing anime is phenomenal, and why I say that it transcends the sports genre. A common belief among Naruto viewers is that Naruto was carried by Kurama, the nine-tailed fox. Well, Peak Reality, the story surgeon, and king of subversion, is here to see if that's actually true or if I could find a way to make Naruto survive. First, let's examine what would happen to Naruto if he never had Kurama. From a power standpoint, he would have less chakra, but a high amount of chakra control. Kakashi specifically says that the QB makes Naruto's chakra more erratic. From a plot standpoint, his parents would still be alive and be able to teach him how to fight. This is a logical difference because almost all of the other kids at Naruto's age were being taught by their parents. Sasuke learned Fireball and Shuriken Jutsu from his family, while others learned clan techniques. With Minato being Naruto's father, he could learn the Flying Raijin Jutsu. I'm not going to give him Rasengan yet because I think that would be overkill, but I could. With Kushina being his mother, he could learn the Kongo Fusa, which is a clan jutsu. Kushina also had large chakra reserves, so I can give some of that to Naruto. With Naruto being the child of the Hokage, I could go overboard and make him better than everyone, but I'll hold back. Since Sasuke came from a powerful clan, I'll model Naruto after him and assume that anything Sasuke could do that wasn't genetic, Naruto could also do at the same level. From the start of the story, Sasuke had great Shuriken Jutsu. Since Minato used his special kunai frequently, it's easy to argue that he would have taught this to Naruto. Sasuke also started with 3 different fire-based attacks. Naruto's natural affinity is wind, so I'll give him 3 wind abilities based on what I think he'll need in the future. The first is a jutsu that increases his speed. The second is a jutsu that fires small wind bullets. The third is a jutsu that fires one large powerful burst of wind. So we have a jutsu for speed, numbers, and power. Naruto wouldn't have Shadow Clone Jutsu, but he'd still have transformation since this had nothing to do with kurama. Now I'll go into each fight. I won't be focusing on how the story might change, just how Naruto could win each fight. Naruto could have beaten Mizuki with any combination of his wind jutsu. The fight against Zabuza could have Naruto using his wind jutsus in place of his shadow clones as a distraction. When Sasuke grabs the Fuma Shuriken, Naruto could use his speed to get to Sasuke before transforming into the Shadow Shuriken. Next is the fight against Haku. This fight will actually be easier now. Haku is fast, but Naruto could match his speed with his own jutsu while carrying Sasuke on his back. This would allow Sasuke to use the Sharingan to eventually keep up with Haku. With both characters having a counter, they could either work together with Naruto being the feet and Sasuke being the eyes, or they could work separately and take down Haku. Either way, this fight would be a more solid win. I'm actually going to give Naruto the Flying Raijin before the Chunin exams rather than at the start as a handicap for me. Naruto vs Lee would be the same. When Naruto gets eaten by the snake, he can teleport out. When Naruto punches the snake, he can use his power jutsu instead. Against Team Oboro, Naruto can use his wind and teleportation, while Kabuto puts in more work in order to attack the illusions. Instead of Naruto using shadow clones to trick the opponents, Sakura could use clone jutsu to make the fakes. After all, she uses this jutsu against Ino in the same arc. The conclusion can have Kabuto or Naruto finishing the battle. His next battle is against Kiba. Now, Naruto has the speed to keep up with Kiba and the power to take him out. This fight would be much faster. Next is Neji. Naruto now has the speed to avoid Neji's attacks. The power jutsu can clash with rotation. Naruto showed intelligence when he allowed his clones to survive after taking damage. Naruto can also surprise Neji by keeping his teleportation jutsu a secret for most of the fight. If he pretends to be knocked out, he can have placed the formula on Neji's back before and teleport there to land the finishing blow. Next is Gaara. Naruto could have dodged all of Gaara's initial attacks with speed or teleportation. For the kunai bomb, he can substitute the clone timing for teleportation. Instead of 2K Barrage, Naruto could immediately summon Gamabunta. I'll cash in on Kushina's chakra here. Naruto can teleport out of Gaara's sand rather than using the Kyuubi chakra, and that's the end of the fight. I'm going to stop here for now. I can make a second part if the views and likes tell me that there is a demand for it. As you can see, Naruto could have survived up until the Chunin exams without Kurama. In the first episode of Story Theory, I went over what a story was and the 4 pillars of story along with their importance. This episode, I'll go over more detailed fundamentals past the building blocks of story. I'll start with an anti-theme. I don't think this is an official word, but I use it to describe the opposite of the theme. As I said in my antagonist video, there can be multiple possible anti-themes for any given theme. For example, if my theme is teamwork is always effective, my anti-theme could be solo work is always effective, or teamwork is sometimes effective. The more descriptive the theme, the more possible negations. The anti-theme will be necessary for later. Now, character arcs. A character arc is the internal journey of a character. This involves one of their beliefs or values being tested and potentially changed. There are 3 main types of character arcs: positive, negative, and flat. In a positive character arc, the character starts with a belief that goes against the theme, or one of the themes. This belief is challenged, and they eventually switch their belief to one that aligns with the theme. A negative character arc is the reverse. The character starts with a belief that aligns with the theme, has that belief tested, and ends with a belief that goes against the theme. Finally, there's the flat character arc. Here, the character starts with a belief that aligns with the theme. The belief is tested, but the character keeps the belief in the end. Wants versus need is an extra strategy to writing a character arc. A want is something the character desires and thinks will bring them happiness. A need is a lesson the character needs to learn in order to be happy, and this aligns with the theme. So with this approach, the character will begin the story chasing their want, but will eventually learn what they need and abandon their want. This is also a positive arc. John Truby mentioned something similar in his book as part of the 7 key story structure steps. He calls it a weakness and a need. The weakness is the flaw the character has. The need is what they need to do to overcome the flaw. Here, the character also has a desire, but this isn't a negative thing, because the character will eventually reach his objective. He also has the formula, weakness times basic action equals change, where basic action is the character's actions in the plot, and change is the change they get at the end of their arc. So there's want versus need, and there's weakness, need, and desire. Next is characterization. McKee describes this as the sum of all observable qualities of a human being, while Oxford defines it as the creation or construction of a fictional character. It's all the little details that are included in a character to make them as fleshed out and three-dimensional as possible. Personality, values, style of speech, choice of dress, education, and occupation are all things that McKee considers part of characterization. When a character has good characterization, they can either feel like a real person or a person that could exist in a certain context. Now, the units of measurement. McKee says that there are 4 units of measurement for a plot: beats, scenes, sequences, and acts. The smallest is a beat, which is defined as an exchange or behavior in action/reaction. These changing behaviors shape the turning of a scene. End quote. The more beats in a scene, the faster the pacing, and vice versa. Next is a scene, which he defines as an action through conflict in more or less continuous time and space that turns the value-charged condition of a character's life on at least one value with a degree of perceptible significance. Ideally, every scene is a story event. End quote. Using this definition of story event, what he's saying is that a scene ideally creates meaningful change in the life situation of a character that is expressed and experienced in terms of value and achieved through conflict. End quote. For example, if a scene starts with a character being confident, after action, ideally, it would end with them doubting themselves. Confidence to doubt is the perceptible difference. Next is a sequence, which is defined as a series of scenes, usually 2 to 5, that culminates with greater impact than any previous scene. End quote. Last is an act, which is defined as a series of sequences that peaks in a climactic scene, which causes a major reversal of values, more powerful in its impact than any previous scene or sequence. End quote. There are primarily 3 acts in a movie. I'd take it a step further and add another unit for long-running stories like comics or TV shows. That would be a story arc. I'd define a story arc as a string of acts, usually 3, that has one primary conflict that is resolved in the last act. In TV, a story arc usually happens within a season, while in manga and anime, a story arc can have varying degrees of lengths. As I showed in my Naruto plot structure video, a single story arc can have smaller sub-arcs within it. Next is 3-act structure. Common practice is to split up a story into 3 acts. These 3 acts often have 6 key moments. They are the intro, inciting incident, first act break, midpoint, second act break, and climax. Resolution is also there, but it's not a key moment because it's not as impactful as the others. The introduction is when the story starts and it has the status quo. The inciting incident is the event that sets the plot into motion and gives the protagonist a new quest. The first act break is the beginning of the quest. The midpoint is when something goes wrong and the protagonist changes. The second act break is the second part of the quest. The climax is the 11th hour and the decisive moment that resolves the plot and proves the theme right. The resolution is the aftermath. Act 1 has the intro and inciting incident. Act 2 has the first act break and midpoint. Act 3 has the second act break, climax, and resolution. Next is conflict. Oxford defines this as a serious disagreement or argument. A story isn't a story if there's no problem that needs to be solved. That problem is conflict. There are many types of conflict. Man versus man is when a person has a problem with another person. Man versus self is when a person has an internal struggle. Man versus society is when a person is fighting against a value or concept in society. Man versus nature and man versus technology are when a person is put in conflict with nature or technology. Next is stakes. I define a stake as what there is to lose in conflict. Stakes are directly tied to conflict. When a story has no stakes, it means that the characters have nothing to lose, thus there is no drama. There are 3 types of stakes: external, emotional/internal, and philosophical. Each of the stakes is tied to one of the pillars. External is the plot. What happens if the characters fail to reach their goal? Emotional is the character. What happens if the character doesn't feel complete and satisfied internally? Philosophical is the theme. What happens if the character fails to prove the theme right? Using my persuasive argument metaphor from episode 1, a story with all three stakes is an argument that brings out the most from its logos, pathos, and ethos. Next is the narrator. The narrator is the person telling the story and is more noticeable in text-based stories. There are two main categories of a narrator: perspective and limit. Perspective is mainly first person or third person. First person means that one of the characters is telling the story. Third person means that there is a story being told to you by an invisible narrator. Limit usually applies to third person. Third person limited means that the narrator can only talk about specific characters and see what they're doing. Third person omniscient means that the narrator knows everything and they can see and talk about all the characters in the story. There are different pros and cons for each perspective and limit, and the decision usually depends on what the author is aiming to do with their story and how much info they want the audience to have. Finally, exposition. Exposition is when the story gives the audience new information that will be necessary for the story to make sense. There isn't much to say about it until I get to the analysis stage of story theory, so that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and help me revolutionize the manga industry by buying my manga and spreading the word. All important links will be in the description.